She watched 3 men murder an innocent person in cold blood. She saw them frame a good man for a crime he didn't commit. She knew the truth that could save a life and expose the killers. But there was one devastating problem. She had no voice, not metaphorically, literally, a mute slave girl, worth less than livestock, invisible to everyone who mattered. In a world where her testimony meant nothing, where speaking up could get her killed, and where powerful men would stop at nothing to silence her forever, she had to find a way to scream the truth without making a sound. 3 days. That's all she had before an innocent man would be declared outlaw and hunted to death. 3 days to prove what she saw. 3 days to give voice to the voiceless. But the killers were watching her now, closing in like wolves, and they'd already made one thing perfectly clear. Dead slaves don't tell tales. The question wasn't whether she'd find her voice. The question was whether she'd survive long enough to use it. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a sword or a testimony. Sometimes it's the courage of someone everyone underestimated, someone they never saw coming, someone who refused to stay silent even when silence was all she had left. The clay bowl slipped from Liv's trembling hands, shattering against the stone floor of the longhouse kitchen. Her heart seized, not from the broken pottery but from what she'd just seen through the narrow gap in the wooden wall. A man's body, face down in the mud behind the stables, blood pooling black beneath the moonlight, and 3 figures walking away, their voices low and satisfied. She pressed her back against the rough timber, lungs burning as she fought to control her breathing. Her fingers clutched at her throat, at the silence that had lived there since she was 7 winters old, since the day her mother's drunk owner had struck her so hard across the face that something inside broke forever. The scream that never came, the words that would never form again. Through the gap she watched them. Erland, the Jarl's cousin, his silver arm rings catching the torchlight. Kjetil, the blacksmith with hands like hammers, and Orm, whose laugh made her skin crawl whenever he passed through the kitchen. They were adjusting their cloaks, checking their boots for mud. Calm, methodical, like men who'd just finished ordinary work. The body hadn't moved. Liv's chest tightened. She knew that body, knew the worn leather boots, the blue tunic with the small tear near the shoulder that she'd noticed 2 days ago when Halvard had come to the kitchen begging Cook for extra bread. He'd smiled at her then, actually smiled. Most free men looked through thralls like smoke, but Halvard had nodded, had mouthed "thank you" when she'd slipped him a piece of cheese wrapped in cloth. Now he was face down in the mud, and the 3 most respected men in the settlement were walking away from his corpse like it was nothing more than a slaughtered pig. Her hands shook as she bent to pick up the broken pottery. The pieces cut into her palms, but she barely felt it. What she felt was the weight of knowledge pressing down on her chest, stealing what little air her damaged throat could pull in. Around her, the kitchen buzzed with the usual chaos. Thralls moved between the fire pits, stirring massive cauldrons of fish stew. The head cook, Solveig, barked orders that Liv read from her lips more than heard over the noise. Steam rose, in thick clouds, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed. No one had noticed her freeze. No one ever did. She was furniture, a pair of hands to scrub pots, to haul water from the creek, to gut fish until her fingers bled. 19 winters of invisible existence. The mute thrall girl born to a mother whose name no one remembered, fathered by some warrior who'd used her mother and moved on. Liv had no value beyond her labor. She had no voice to lose. Until tonight, that hadn't mattered. She dumped the broken pottery into the waste bucket, her mind racing faster than her racing pulse. Through the small window above the washing basin, she could see torches moving, shouts rising. The body had been discovered. In moments, the entire settlement would know, and whatever story Erland and his companions planned to tell, it would become truth. Because men like Erland didn't lie. Men like Erland were believed. Men like Erland could make a mute thrall disappear without anyone asking questions. The realization hit her like a fist to the stomach. She grabbed the edge of the washing basin, knees threatening to buckle. The rough wood bit into her palms where the pottery had cut her. Small drops of blood mixed with the greasy water, swirling pink before disappearing into the murk. She'd seen them. She'd seen everything, and they would kill her for it if they knew. The kitchen door burst open. Cold night air rushed in, making the fire pits hiss and spark. Gunnar, one of the Jarl's closest warriors, stood in the doorway, his face grave. Halvard Thorvaldsson is dead, murdered behind the stables. The Jarl wants everyone in the Great Hall. Now. The kitchen erupted into gasps and whispers. Solveig crossed herself, the Christian gesture she still made in private despite the settlement's old ways. The other thralls clutched at each other, eyes wide with fear. Murder meant investigation. Investigation meant suspicion. And suspicion always rolled downhill toward those who couldn't defend themselves. Liv's blood turned to ice water. She followed the stream of thralls and servants toward the great hall, her bare feet silent on the cold, packed earth. Around her, voices rose and fell. Halvard was well liked, a good man, a loyal warrior. Who would want him dead? His brother Thorvald would be devastated. They were inseparable, those two, like two sides of the same coin. The great hall blazed with light. Every torch had been lit, every brazier stoked until the massive space felt hot as a forge. The Jarl sat in his high seat, face carved from stone. His wife Ingrid stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder. And there, in the center of it all, was Thorvald. He knelt on the rush-covered floor, hands bound behind his back, face swollen from weeping. Blood spattered his tunic, his hands, his face. So much blood. I didn't kill him. Thorvald's voice broke on the words, raw and desperate. I would never. He's my brother. He's my brother. But Erland stood before the Jarl, his face a mask of sorrow, his voice steady and sure. I found Thorvald over the body, my Jarl, his knife in his hand, his brother's blood on his clothes. I heard them arguing this afternoon about the land division, about Halvard's refusal to let Thorvald expand his farm onto the western field. Lies. Every word was poison wrapped in honey. Liv's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She stood in the back with the other thralls, invisible among the crowd. Her throat burned with words that would never come. Her chest ached with the scream that had been locked inside her for 12 years. She watched Kjetil and Orm nod gravely at Erland's testimony, watched them add their own observations. Yes, they'd heard the brothers arguing. Yes, Thorvald had seemed angry lately. Yes, blood feuds between brothers over land were common enough. The crowd murmured agreement. Thorvald's wife Astrid stood frozen near the women's benches, her face white as winter snow, one hand pressed over her mouth. She was shaking, her entire body trembling like a birch tree in a storm. The evidence is clear, Erland said, his voice heavy with false regret. As much as it pains us all, Thorvald Sigurdsson murdered his brother for land and inheritance. He must be declared outlaw. He must face the full justice of our laws. Thorvald let out a sound like a dying animal. Please, please, I loved him. I would die for him. Someone else did this. Someone is lying. But who would believe a man covered in, his brother's blood over 3 respected witnesses? Liv's fingernails cut crescents into her palms. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Around her, thralls whispered nervously, already retreating toward the kitchen. This was free men's business, dangerous business. Best to be invisible. But Liv couldn't move. She stared at Thorvald's broken face, at Astrid's silent tears, at Erland's satisfied smile hidden beneath his mask of sorrow. She'd seen the truth. She knew the truth, and she had absolutely no way to tell it. Liv couldn't sleep. The hay mattress in the thrall's quarters felt like stone beneath her back, and every time she closed her eyes she saw Halvard's body, saw the blood, saw Erland's cold smile as he condemned an innocent man. The pre-dawn darkness pressed against the small window opening, thick and suffocating. Around her, 12 other thralls snored and shifted in their sleep, their breathing creating a rhythm that usually comforted her. Tonight it felt like a countdown. Tick, tick, tick toward Thorvald's death. Because that's what outlawry meant. Any man could kill him without consequence. He'd be hunted like a wolf, driven into the wilderness to freeze or starve. And Erland would take his lands, would expand his influence, would walk away clean while a good man died for a crime he didn't commit. Liv sat up, her rough wool blanket falling away. The cold bit through her thin shift, raising goose flesh on her arms. Her hands moved to her throat, fingers tracing the thin scar that ran along her jaw. The reminder of the day her voice died. She'd screamed then, when the blow came. One long, piercing scream that had damaged something vital. After that, only silence. But her mind had never been silent. Her thoughts were loud, constant, precise. She remembered everything she saw, every conversation she lip-read, every detail others missed because they assumed she was simple. Mute meant stupid to most people. It meant invisible. She'd built her entire existence on that invisibility. Now she needed to destroy it. Her heart raced as she stood, careful not to wake the others. She pulled on her worn dress, the fabric stiff with old fish oil and wood smoke. Her fingers fumbled with the leather tie at her waist, shaking so badly she had to try 3 times before it held. What was she doing? She was a thrall. Less than nothing. Even if she found a way to communicate what she'd seen, who would believe her? Her testimony was worthless in law. Thralls couldn't speak at the thing, couldn't accuse free men, couldn't even defend themselves against accusations. She was property. You didn't listen to a shovel's opinion about how to dig, but she had to try. The settlement was beginning to wake as she slipped out of the thralls' quarters. Smoke rose from the longhouse chimneys, gray against the purple dawn sky. Roosters crowed from the chicken coops. A dog barked somewhere near the stables, the sound sharp in the cold air. Liv's breath clouded in front of her face as she hurried toward the main longhouse. Her bare feet were already numb on the frozen ground, but she barely noticed. Her entire focus was on the impossible task ahead. She needed to reach Astrid, Thorvald's wife. The only person who might, possibly, listen to a mute thrall's desperate gestures. The great hall was nearly empty at this hour. A few warriors slept on the benches, their cloaks pulled over their heads. The fire pits had burned down to embers, glowing red in the dim light. The smell of stale mead and unwashed bodies hung heavy in the air. Astrid sat alone near the women's benches, still wearing yesterday's blood-spattered dress. She hadn't moved, hadn't slept. Her hands clutched a piece of cloth, halberds she realized, embroidered with the pattern Astrid herself had stitched. Her face was hollow, eyes red and swollen from crying. Liv approached slowly, her footsteps silent on the rush-covered floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. This was suicide. Astrid was the Jarl's niece, a woman of status and respect. She wouldn't want comfort from a thrall. She wouldn't even acknowledge Liv's existence. But when Liv stopped 3 paces away, hands clasped nervously in front of her, Astrid looked up. Their eyes met. And for one brief moment, Liv saw something other than grief in that gaze. She saw desperation, the wild, drowning panic of someone watching their entire world collapse. Liv raised her hands, slowly, started to gesture, pointed toward the stables, then made the motion of walking. 3 fingers held up. Then she drew a knife across her own throat, eyes never leaving Astrid's face. Astrid stared at her, uncomprehending. What? I don't understand your games, thrall. Leave me alone. The rejection hit like a physical blow. But Liv didn't retreat. She couldn't. She tried again, more emphatically, pointed to her eyes, made the walking gesture, held up 3 fingers with more force. Then, the knife motion again, followed by pointing toward where Halvard's body had been found. I said, leave me alone! Astrid's voice rose, sharp and breaking. Several warriors stirred on their benches. One sat up, scowling at the disturbance. Liv's hands dropped to her sides. Her throat burned with frustration so intense it felt like fire. The words were right there, trapped behind the damage, screaming to get out. She'd seen it. She'd seen everything. Why couldn't anyone understand? She turned to leave, defeat weighing her shoulders down like wet wool. But then Astrid's voice stopped her. Quieter now, almost curious. Wait. Liv froze. You're the mute girl from the kitchen. Astrid stood slowly, the cloth still clutched in her white-knuckled grip. She moved closer, studying Liv's face with new intensity. You were in the hall last night. I saw you. You were staring at Erland like you'd seen a ghost. Liv's pulse jumped. She nodded frantically, relief flooding through her veins. You saw something. It wasn't a question. Astrid's voice had changed, gaining an edge of steel beneath the grief. Show me again. Slower. So Liv did. She walked through every gesture with painstaking care, pointed to her eyes, made the motion of seeing through a gap, held up 3 fingers and pointed toward where Erland, Kjetil, and Orm usually gathered, made the walking motion toward the stables. Then the killing motion, brutal and clear. Astrid's face went pale, then red, then white again. Her hand flew to her mouth, the cloth falling forgotten to the floor. You're saying you saw 3 men kill Halvard? That Erland and the others murdered him and blamed my husband? Liv nodded so hard her neck hurt. That's impossible. That's insane. Why would they? But even as Astrid said the words, something shifted in her expression. Calculation. Memory. The land dispute. Erland wanted Thorvald's western fields for years, offered to buy them twice. Thorvald refused both times because the land borders the creek, and without creek access, his farm would fail. If Thorvald is outlawed, his property goes to his closest male relative. That's Erland. He's Thorvald's cousin through his mother's line. The pieces were falling into place. Liv watched the realization spread across Astrid's face like poison. But you're a thrall. You can't testify at the thing. Your word means nothing before the law. Astrid's voice cracked with fresh despair. Even if I believe you, even if I know you're telling the truth, it changes nothing. They'll still condemn him. They'll still declare him outlaw. And Erland will walk free. Liv shook her head violently, grabbed Astrid's hand, squeezed it hard, pointed to herself, then to Astrid, then made a gesture of joining, of unity. Together, Astrid whispered. Her eyes searched Liv's face, looking for something. Hope, maybe, or courage. You think we can prove it together? Liv nodded. She had no idea how, but standing there in the cold dawn light, holding the hand of a free woman who finally saw her, finally believed her, she felt something she hadn't felt in 12 years of silence. She felt heard. The thing would convene in 3 days. 3 days to prove a murdered man's innocence, to expose 3 respected liars, to give voice to someone who had none. 3 days before Thorvald would be declared outlaw and hunted like an animal. Liv scrubbed the same iron pot for the 4th time, her hands moving mechanically while her mind raced. Around her the kitchen hummed with morning chaos. Solveig shouted orders about the bread ovens. 2 thralls argued over who'd burned the porridge. Steam rose from the washing basins in thick clouds that made everything blurry and dreamlike. But there was nothing dreamlike about the danger she'd walked into. Since dawn, she'd felt eyes on her, not the usual dismissive glances that slid past her like water off oiled leather. Real eyes, watching, calculating. Twice she'd turned to find Orm standing in the kitchen doorway, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. The second time he'd smiled, a slow, cold smile that promised things she didn't want to imagine. He knew, or suspected. Either way, she was marked. Her hands trembled as she set down the pot. The metal clanged against the wooden counter, drawing Solveig's sharp attention. Clumsy girl, you break that pot, it comes out of your food rations. The head cook waved a wooden spoon threateningly, but her eyes weren't unkind. You're jumpier than a cat today. Something wrong? Liv shook her head quickly, dropping her gaze to the floor, the universal thrall posture. See nothing, say nothing, be nothing. But her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She couldn't stay in the kitchen, not with Orm circling like a wolf scenting wounded prey. She needed to find Astrid again, needed to plan their next move. But how? Thralls didn't seek out free women without permission, especially not the Jarl's niece. The morning dragged on with agonizing slowness. She hauled water from the creek until her shoulders screamed, gutted fish until her hands were raw and bleeding, scrubbed floors until her knees were bruised purple. All the while, that crawling sensation of being watched never left. It was mid-afternoon when Astrid appeared in the kitchen doorway. The room fell silent instantly. Free women, especially ones of Astrid's status, didn't enter thrall spaces. It was beneath them. The hierarchies were clear and rigid as iron bars. "You!" Astrid pointed directly at Liv, her voice cold and imperious. "The Jarl's wife needs someone to help with her weaving. You'll do. Come with me now." Every thrall in the kitchen stared. Solveig's mouth hung open in surprise. This was unusual enough to be suspicious, but no one questioned a direct order from the Jarl's niece. Liv wiped her bloody hands on her dress and followed Astrid out, her pulse racing. The moment they were clear of the kitchen, out of sight. Behind the grain storage building, Astrid grabbed her arm. "We have a problem." Astrid's face was pale, her grip tight enough to bruise. "I went to see Thorvald in the holding pit this morning. Told him what you saw. He wept like a child, said he knew he was innocent, but thought no one would believe him. But then I told him about you being a witness, and he just looked at me with these dead eyes and said it doesn't matter, that even if we prove you saw something, Erland will just claim you're lying to gain favor, or that you're simple and imagined it, or that I put you up to it because I'm a desperate wife trying to save her husband." The words landed like stones in Liv's stomach. She'd known testimony from a mute thrall was worthless. But hearing it spoken so plainly, hearing all the ways it could be dismissed and twisted, made the impossibility of their task real. "We need proof," Astrid continued, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Physical proof. Something that ties Erland and the others directly to Halvard's murder. Something that can't be explained away or dismissed." Liv nodded, her mind already working. She gestured toward the stables, made the motion of searching, of finding. "You want to go back there? To where it happened?" Astrid's eyes widened. "That's dangerous. If anyone sees you poking around, if Erland realizes you're investigating, he'll kill you. He's already killed once. What's one thrall more?" The casual way Astrid said it, the simple acceptance that Liv's life had so little value, should have stung. But it was just truth, harsh and cold as winter iron. Liv made the gesture anyway, pointed to herself, to the stables, to the ground where Halvard had fallen. Then she made the motion of finding something, holding it up triumphantly. "You think they left evidence behind?" Astrid's voice carried a thread of desperate hope. "The Jarl's men searched the area this morning, found nothing but blood and mud. Erland's witnesses said Thorvald must have disposed of the murder weapon, probably threw it in the creek." But Liv shook her head insistently. "Free men searched like free men. They looked for obvious things, big things. They didn't notice the small details that thralls learned to see, the tiny inconsistencies that made the difference between a beating and mercy. She'd spent 19 years being invisible, learning to observe without being observed. She saw things others missed. She had to try. "Tonight then," Astrid whispered, glancing around nervously. "After the evening meal, when most of the settlement is drunk and lazy. I'll create a distraction near the Great Hall. You slip to the stables. You'll have maybe a quarter hour before someone notices I'm making noise for no reason. Can you work that fast?" Liv nodded, though her hands were shaking again. A quarter hour to search a murder scene, to find proof that 3 powerful men were killers, to stay invisible while examining ground that dozens of warriors had already trampled over. It was impossible, but impossible was all they had. "Be careful." Astrid's grip on her arm tightened, and for a moment, something almost like friendship flickered in her eyes. I know you're just a thrall to most people. I know you don't matter in their world, but you matter in mine now. You're the only person in this entire settlement who knows the truth, the only person who can save my husband's life. So stay alive. Please." The words broke something open in Liv's chest. Someone valued her, not for her labor, not for what she could scrub or carry or gut, but for who she was, for what she knew. For the first time since her mother died when she was 10 winters old, someone saw her as human. She nodded, blinking back tears she couldn't afford to shed. They separated then, Astrid returning to the great hall with her mask of grief firmly in place, Liv heading back to the kitchen with her mask of invisibility. But as she walked, she felt that crawling sensation again. Turned her head just slightly. Orm stood near the blacksmith's forge watching her, and this time he wasn't alone. Kjetil stood beside him, speaking low and urgent. Both men's eyes were locked on Liv with an intensity that turned her blood to ice water. They knew she was investigating. They knew she was dangerous, and they would not let her live long enough to speak her truth. Night fell like a held breath. Liv stood in the shadows behind the grain storage, waiting for Astrid's signal. Her entire body coiled tight as a bowstring. The settlement buzzed with evening activity. Warriors gathered in the great hall, their voices rising and falling with mead-fueled laughter. Thralls hurried between buildings, carrying food and drink. Somewhere a child cried, quickly hushed. Normal sounds. A normal night. Except nothing was normal. Not with 2 days left until the thing. Not with Orm and Kjetil watching her every move since this afternoon. Not with the weight of an innocent man's life, pressing down on her shoulders like stones. Then she heard it, Astrid's voice shrill and panicked, cutting through the evening noise. "Fire! There's fire in the weaving house! Someone help!" Liv didn't wait. She moved fast, keeping to the shadows, her bare feet silent on the cold earth. Behind her, she heard men shouting, rushing toward the supposed fire. Astrid was good, convincing enough to draw attention, not so convincing that they'd actually find flames and realize it was a lie. The stables loomed ahead, dark and quiet. The horses stirred restlessly in their stalls, sensing her presence. The smell hit her first. Blood and earth and something else. Fear. It soaked into the wood, into the ground, a permanent stain that no amount of time would erase. She dropped to her knees near the back wall, where she'd seen Halvard's body 2 nights ago. The ground was still dark with his blood, though someone had tried to cover it with fresh hay. Her hands moved quickly, methodically, pushing aside the hay, feeling along the packed dirt. What was she looking for? She didn't know exactly. Just something. Anything that didn't belong. Anything that would prove 3 men had committed murder. Her fingers found something cold. Metal. She pulled it free from the mud, her heart leaping. A silver arm ring. Expensive, the kind that marked status and wealth. She held it up to the thin moonlight filtering through the stable slats, squinting at the design. 3 ravens. Erlend's symbol. He wore rings just like this. She'd seen them catch the firelight 100 times when he passed through the kitchen demanding the best cuts of meat. But then her hope crumbled like ash. Of course he'd been here. He'd discovered the body. He'd given testimony. His presence at the scene was already explained, already justified. An arm ring proved nothing except that he'd been near the stables, which everyone already knew. Frustration burned hot in her throat. She kept searching, more. Desperately now. Time was running out. She could hear the commotion at the weaving house starting to die down. Soon they'd realize there was no fire. Soon they'd scatter back to their evening routines. Soon someone might come to the stables. Her hands found something else. Fabric. She pulled it free, her breath catching. A piece of torn cloth, expensive wool dyed deep blue, the color Jarls wore, the color Erlend wore. But again, it proved nothing. He'd been here. Everyone knew that. She was running out of time and ideas when her fingers brushed against something that made her freeze. Not metal or fabric. Something organic, soft but firm. She lifted it carefully, moved closer to the sliver of moonlight. A mushroom, but not just any mushroom. She recognized it instantly from the times she'd foraged in the woods with other thralls. Destroying angel. Beautiful, pure white, deadly as a snake's kiss. The kind that grew deep in the forest, never near settlements. The kind that killed. Slowly, making victims seem drunk first, then violently ill, then dead. Her mind raced. Why would this be here? Mushrooms didn't grow in stables. Someone had brought it. But why? Then understanding hit her like a physical blow. The testimony. What had Erland said? That he'd heard the brothers arguing in the afternoon. That Thorvald seemed angry, seemed drunk even. Halvard hadn't been drunk. He'd been poisoned. The mushroom's early symptoms mimicked drunkenness perfectly. Confusion, stumbling, slurred speech. Anyone seeing him would assume he'd had too much mead. But it meant something else entirely. It meant his murder was planned, premeditated. Not a heat-of-the-moment killing between arguing brothers, but a calculated assassination. And there was only one way those mushrooms got into Halvard's system. Someone had put them in his food or drink, someone who had access to the kitchen, someone who could slip poison into a meal without being noticed. Her blood turned to ice water as the full picture formed. Erland couldn't have done it alone. He needed someone in the kitchen, someone who served the food, someone who could poison Halvard without raising suspicion. She heard the footstep too late. Just a whisper of sound behind her. Then a hand clamped over her mouth, another arm wrapping around her chest, lifting her off the ground. She couldn't scream, couldn't make a sound even if the hand wasn't there. Her damaged throat locked up, useless as always. Thought you were clever, didn't you? Orm's voice was soft against her ear, almost gentle. It made her skin crawl worse than if he'd shouted. Sneaking around, playing investigator. But you're just a stupid, mute thrall who doesn't know when to keep her broken head down. He dragged her deeper into the stable, away from the door, away from any chance of being seen. Her feet kicked uselessly at the air. The mushroom fell from her hand, disappearing into the dark hay. Jettel wanted to slit your throat right here. Make it. Look like you were stealing and got caught. But Erland's smarter than that. Too many questions if another body shows up right now. So we're going to have a little accident instead. You're going to fall into the creek tonight. Hit your head on a rock. Drown in the dark. Tragic. But thralls die all the time. No one will question it. Liv's mind screamed even as her throat stayed silent. She thrashed harder, but Orm was a blacksmith. His arms were iron, his grip unbreakable. He carried her toward the back entrance of the stable, the one that led down to the creek path. Then a voice cut through the darkness, sharp and clear and furious. Let her go. Astrid stood in the stable doorway, a torch in one hand, a long kitchen knife in the other. The firelight painted her face in harsh shadows, making her look like something carved from stone. Behind her stood two figures, Ingrid, the Jarl's wife, her expression cold as winter, and Solveig, the head cook, holding a heavy iron pan like a weapon. Orm froze. His grip loosened just slightly, just enough. Liv drove her elbow back into his stomach with all the force of 19 years of hauling water and gutting fish. He grunted, stumbling. She twisted free, falling hard to the stable floor, scrambling away on hands and knees toward Astrid. The Jarl will hear about this. Ingrid's voice was ice and authority. You will explain to my husband why you were attacking a thrall in the middle of the night. You will explain it very carefully. Orm's face went white, then red. His hand moved toward the knife at his belt. I wouldn't, Solveig said calmly, hefting the iron pan. I've cracked bigger skulls than yours for less, and there's 3 of us, plus whatever warriors the mistress brought when she raised the alarm about an intruder in the stables. She hadn't brought any warriors. Liv could tell by the slight tremor in Astrid's hand. It was a bluff, a desperate, dangerous bluff. But Orm believed it. His hand fell away from his knife. His eyes darted between the 3 women, calculating odds, finding them impossible. This isn't over, he said quietly, his gaze locking on Liv. You're dead. You just don't know it yet. Then he turned and walked out into the night, disappearing into shadows like smoke. Liv's entire body shook so hard she thought she might fly apart. Astrid rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside her, hands frantically checking for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did he harm you?" "Gods, I thought I'd be too late. I heard him follow you. Saw him slip toward the stables. I ran to get help and..." Liv grabbed Astrid's hand, squeezed it hard, then pointed desperately at the hay where the mushroom had fallen. They had to find it, had to secure the evidence before it was lost or destroyed, because now Erland and his men knew she was hunting them, and they would stop at nothing to silence her forever. They found the mushroom. Ingrid held the torch while Liv searched frantically through the hay, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp anything. When her fingers finally closed around the pale white cap, relief flooded through her so intensely she nearly sobbed. But relief died quickly when she held it up to the torchlight and saw Ingrid's face. The Jarl's wife stared at the destroying angel with recognition that turned her features gray. Poison. The word fell like a stone into deep water. That's how they did it. Made Halvard seem drunk and confused before they killed him. Made it look like a drunken argument between brothers gone wrong. Astrid grabbed Liv's shoulder, her grip fierce. This proves premeditation. This proves it was planned murder, not a spontaneous fight. This changes everything. But Solveig shook her head slowly, her weathered face grim in the flickering light. It proves someone used poison. It doesn't prove who. Erland will claim anyone could have dropped that mushroom there. Could have been there for days. Could have been planted to frame him. You need more than a mushroom to accuse the Jarl's cousin of murder. The truth of it hit Liv like a fist. The cook was right. Physical evidence meant nothing without a chain of proof, without testimony, without a voice that mattered before the law. "Then we need to find who put the poison in Halvard's food," Astrid said, her voice gaining strength. Someone in the kitchen had to be working with Erland. Someone who had access to meals, who could slip poison into drink or stew without being noticed. All eyes turned to Solveig. The head cook's face hardened. "Don't look at me like that. I've run that kitchen for 23 years, fed 3 Jarls and their families, never poisoned a soul and never will. My honor means something, even if I'm just a freed thrall who earned her way up." "I'm not accusing you," Astrid said quickly, "but you know everyone who works in that kitchen. You know who was acting strange 2 days ago, who had opportunity to poison Halvard's meal." Solveig's jaw worked, grinding something over in her mind. The torch crackled and spat, sending shadows dancing across the stable walls. Horses shifted nervously in their stalls, sensing the tension thick as smoke. "There was something," Solveig finally said, her voice reluctant. 2 days ago, morning meal. Halvard came through early, before most warriors were up. Asked for bread and cheese to take with him. Said he had work in the western fields and wanted to start early. I was busy with the ovens, so I told Bjorg to fix him a plate. Liv's heart stuttered. Bjorg, the new kitchen thrall who'd arrived 3 months ago. Sold by a trader from the south, or so the story went. Quiet, kept to herself, never caused problems, never spoke to anyone except when Erland came through the kitchen. Liv grabbed Astrid's arm, gesturing frantically, pointed to herself, made the motion of seeing, then pointed toward where the kitchen would be, made the gesture of 2 people talking secretly, Erland and Bjorg. "You saw them together?" Astrid's eyes widened. "Speaking privately?" Liv nodded emphatically. 3 times she'd noticed it. Once behind the grain storage, once near the creek at dusk, once in the shadows by the mead hall. Each time Bjorg had looked nervous, frightened even. Each time Erland had been speaking low and urgent, his hand on her arm in a grip that looked more like threat than comfort. "Where is Bjorg now?" Ingrid's voice cut through sharp as a blade. "Bring her here, now." But Solveig's face had gone pale. "That's just it, mistress. She's gone. Disappeared sometime this evening. I noticed during the commotion about the fire. Thought maybe she'd run off scared. But her things are still in the thrall's quarters. Her blanket, her spare dress, everything. Like she left in a hurry and didn't plan to come back." The implications settled over them like frost. Bjorg was either running or she was already dead. Either way, she was the key witness they needed, and she was gone. "They're cleaning up," Astrid whispered, her voice hollow. "Eliminating anyone who could contradict their story. First they try to kill Liv, now Bjorg vanishes. By the time the thing convenes tomorrow, every loose end will be tied up or buried." Tomorrow. The word hit Liv like a physical blow. She'd lost track of time in the chaos. The thing wasn't in 2 days anymore. It was tomorrow. Less than a full day to prove Thorvald's innocence. Less than a full day before he was declared outlaw and sentenced to death. And their best evidence was a mushroom that could have come from anywhere, and a missing thrall who might already be feeding fish at the bottom of the fjord. "We present what we have," Ingrid said firmly. She was the Jarl's wife, used to making impossible decisions. "I'll speak at the thing. I'll tell them about the poison, about the suspicious circumstances, about Orm attacking Liv tonight. I'll demand further investigation before any verdict is reached." "With respect, mistress," Solveig said. "Carefully. Erland is the Jarl's cousin, your husband's blood. Accusing him based on a mushroom found by a mute thrall and testimony about a missing kitchen worker. He'll say you're being manipulated by a desperate wife. He'll say we're all hysterical women seeing conspiracy where there's only tragedy. Then what do you suggest?" Astrid's voice cracked with desperation. "We let them murder my husband, let Erland profit from his crimes, let an innocent man die?" Silence fell like a hammer. Because there was no good answer, no clear path forward, just impossible choices and terrible odds. Liv's mind raced, turning over every detail, every observation, every small thing she'd noticed in the past 2 days. There had to be something, some connection they were missing, some piece of evidence that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. Then it hit her, the torn blue cloth she'd found, Erland's cloth. Everyone knew he'd been at the scene, so the cloth proved nothing by itself. But there was something about it. Something wrong. She'd seen that tear before, seen where it came from. She grabbed Astrid's hand, pulled her closer to the torchlight, started gesturing rapidly, pointed to her own dress, made the motion of tearing fabric, then pointed up high, like reaching for something above her head, made the gesture of struggling, fighting. "You're saying the cloth was torn in a struggle?" Astrid tried to follow. "But Erland claims he only found the body. If his clothing was torn fighting with someone, that proves he lied about being just a witness." Liv nodded frantically, then made another gesture, pointed to the stable wall, up high where the support beams crossed, made the motion of fabric catching, tearing. "There's more cloth still caught on something?" Ingrid moved forward, holding the torch high. "Show us." Liv led them to the back corner where she'd seen Halvard's body, pointed up at the beam that ran along the wall, about head height for a tall man. There, barely visible in the torchlight, was a thin strip of blue fabric, caught on a rough knot in the wood, the same blue as the piece she'd found in the mud. "That's 9 feet up," Solveig said slowly. "How did cloth get torn that high unless someone was standing, fighting, being pushed against that wall?" "Unless Halvard fought back," Astrid breathed. "Unless when they tried to poison him, when he realized what was happening, he fought, and Erland or one of the others got pushed against that beam. Hard enough to tear expensive wool. It wasn't conclusive proof, it wasn't a confession, but it was a crack in the story. A physical contradiction to Erland's testimony that he'd only arrived after Halvard was already dead. We bring this to the thing, Ingrid decided. All of it. The mushroom, the torn cloth, the missing thrall, Orm's attack on Liv tonight. We lay it all before the assembly and demand they investigate further before condemning Thorvald. And if they don't listen, Astrid's voice was small, terrified. Then we pray to whatever gods still care about justice, Ingrid said grimly, because tomorrow truth will either prevail or die. Dawn broke cold and merciless over the Thing grounds. Liv stood at the very back of the assembly, pressed between other thralls and lower servants, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her temples. Before her, the entire settlement had gathered, warriors in their finest cloaks, free farmers with weathered faces, women in their best wool dresses, children darting between adults until sharp words sent them scurrying. And at the center of it all, the law speaker's stone, the place where justice was supposed to happen. Thorvald knelt in the dirt before the assembly, his hands still bound, his face gaunt from 2 days without real sleep. Astrid stood as close as they'd let her, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She tried to reach him, to touch his hand, but the guards had pushed her back. Now she could only watch. As her husband faced judgment, the Jarl sat in his high seat, carved from ancient oak and decorated with intricate knotwork. His face was stone, unreadable. Ingrid sat beside him, her spine rigid, her hands folded carefully in her lap. But Liv could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her jaw. Erland stood before the assembly, flanked by Kjetil and Orm. All three wore their finest clothes, their silver arm rings catching the early light. They looked prosperous, respected, honorable, everything their testimony had painted them as. Liv felt sick. "We are gathered to render judgment in the matter of Halvard Thorvaldsson's murder," the law speaker announced, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. He was an old man, gray-bearded and bent, but his voice still held power. "The evidence has been presented. 3 witnesses saw Thorvald Sigurdsson standing over his brother's body with blood on his hands and murder in his heart. The law is clear in such cases." "Wait." Ingrid's voice cut through like a blade. She rose from her seat, and the entire assembly seemed to hold its breath. The Jarl's wife speaking at the thing was unusual, not forbidden, but rare enough to command attention. "There is new evidence that must be heard before judgment is passed." Erland's face remained perfectly calm, but Liv saw it. The tiny tightening around his eyes, the slight shift in his stance. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know what. "With respect, mistress," Erland said smoothly, "the matter is settled. 3 witnesses gave testimony. The accused was found with his brother's blood on his hands. What new evidence could possibly change these facts? The fact that Halvard was poisoned before he died." Ingrid's words fell like stones into still water. "The fact that his murder was planned, not spontaneous. The fact that your testimony about finding him already dead is contradicted by physical evidence." The assembly erupted in whispers. The Jarl leaned forward in his seat, his expression sharp. "Explain yourself, wife. These are serious accusations." Ingrid gestured, and Solveig stepped forward, holding a cloth bundle. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing the destroying angel mushroom. Even from the back of the crowd, Liv could see how people recoiled. Everyone knew that mushroom. Everyone knew what it meant. "This was found at the murder scene," Ingrid said. "A destroying angel. It doesn't grow near settlements. Someone brought it there. Deliberately. Someone used it to poison Halvard, making him appear drunk and confused, making it easier to kill him and frame his brother." "That proves nothing," Erland said, but his voice had lost some of its smoothness. "Anyone could have dropped that mushroom there. It could have been there for weeks. It could have been planted by someone trying to cast doubt on clear evidence." "Then explain the torn cloth." Astrid's voice rang out, stronger than Liv had ever heard it. She held up the blue fabric, the piece torn from expensive wool. "This was found in the mud near Halvard's body. It matches the cloth caught high on the stable beam, 9 feet up. The same blue you're wearing, Erland. The same expensive dye that marks your status." "I was at the scene," Erland said quickly. "I found the body. I gave testimony. Of course, my clothing might have torn on something. That proves nothing except that I was there, which I never denied. But you said you arrived after Halvard was already, dead." Astrid pressed forward, her voice gaining momentum. "You said you found Thorvald standing over the body. You said there was no struggle, no fight, but that cloth 9 feet up tells a different story. It tells of a struggle, of someone being pushed hard against that wall, of Halvard fighting for his life against his attackers." The assembly was riveted now. Even the children had gone silent. The law speaker's wrinkled face showed interest, calculation. "And there's more," Ingrid continued. "Last night, Orm attacked a thrall who was investigating the murder scene. He tried to drown her in the creek to silence her. I stopped him myself along with witnesses. Why would he do such a thing if there was nothing to hide? All eyes turned to Orm. His face had gone red, then white. She was stealing. I caught her sneaking around and tried to restrain her. The mistress misunderstood. I misunderstood nothing. Ingrid's voice was ice. You told her she was going to have an accident, that she would drown and no one would question it. Those were your exact words. The crowd murmured louder now. Doubt was spreading like cracks in ice, small fractures that could become chasms. But Erland was smart. Liv could see him adapting, shifting tactics. With respect to the Jarl's wife, she is being manipulated by desperate women and unreliable thralls. The torn cloth proves only that I was at the scene, which I admitted. The mushroom could be from anywhere, and the word of a thrall means nothing before this assembly. They are grasping at shadows because they cannot accept the truth. Thorvald killed his brother. The evidence is overwhelming. Then let the thrall testify. The words came from an unexpected source. Thorvald himself, his voice hoarse but strong. If she saw something, let her tell it. I don't care if her testimony is worthless by law. I want the truth spoken before I die. She's mute, Erland said dismissively. She cannot speak. She can only make gestures that could mean anything or nothing. This is absurd. I can interpret for her. Astrid stepped forward, her chin raised. I've learned to understand her signs. Let her show us what she saw that night. Let the assembly judge for themselves whether she's credible. The Jarl looked to the law speaker. The old man's face was troubled, conflicted. It is irregular. Thralls cannot give testimony, but neither is there law against someone demonstrating what they witnessed through action rather than words. If the assembly agrees to hear it, I will allow it. The assembly agrees, several voices called out. More joined them. Curiosity had overcome tradition. They wanted to see what the mute thrall would show them. Erland's face tightened. This is a farce, a desperate attempt to— Silence, the Jarl commanded. His voice was thunder. I want to see what she has to say. Bring the thrall forward. Liv's legs nearly gave out. Solveig's hand pushed her gently from behind. Go on, girl. Speak your own truth, however you can. She walked forward through the parting crowd, every eye on her. Some curious, some skeptical, some hostile. She was a thrall, property, less than human to most of them. But right now she was the only voice an innocent man had. She reached the center of the assembly, standing before the law speaker's stone. Her hands shook. Her throat burned with the scream that had lived there silent for 12 years. Then Astrid stepped beside her, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Show them, she whispered. Show them everything. Liv took a breath, raised her hands, and began to tell the story that only she could tell. Liv's hands moved through the air like she was painting pictures only she could see. She pointed to her eyes first, then made the motion of looking through a narrow gap. The assembly watched, some leaning forward, some frowning with confusion. But they watched. She pointed to where the kitchen would be, made the gesture of working, scrubbing. Then the motion of something falling, breaking. Her hands showed the bowl shattering, showed herself freezing in place. Then she pointed through an imaginary gap again, her eyes wide, her entire body conveying the shock of what she'd witnessed. She was in the kitchen, Astrid translated, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She dropped something and looked through a gap in the wall. She saw something that made her stop breathing. Liv held up 3 fingers, pointed toward where Erland, Kjetil, and Orm stood, made the motion of walking, casual and unhurried. Then she pointed down at the ground, made the shape of a body lying still. Her face transformed, showing the horror of that moment, the realization of what she was seeing. 3 men, Astrid continued. These 3 men, walking away from a body on the ground. Lies, Erland said sharply. She's performing for her freedom. Thralls will say anything, do anything to— Let her finish, the Jarl commanded. His eyes were fixed on Liv now, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Liv showed the men checking their clothes, adjusting their cloaks, the careful, methodical movements of people cleaning up after work. Then she made the gesture of them walking away, satisfied. Done. She pointed to the body again, made the motion of recognizing. Her hands showed Halvard's worn boots, his torn tunic, the small details she'd noticed. Then she clutched at her chest, her face crumpling with the pain of recognition. She'd known him. He'd been kind to her. She recognized Halvard, Astrid's voice caught. She knew it was him lying there dead. Then Liv's gestures changed, became more urgent. She showed time passing, showed people discovering the body. Torches moving, voices calling. She showed Thorvald being dragged forward, his hands bound. Showed the blood on his clothes, the knife someone had placed in his hand. But then she shook her head violently, pointed to her eyes again, made the three men walking away gesture once more. Showed clearly that Thorvald hadn't been there when Halvard died. Showed that the three witnesses were lying. The assembly erupted in noise, some shouting that it was absurd, that a thrall's pantomime meant nothing. Others demanding to know why she would risk everything to lie. Others simply arguing with their neighbors, the debate spreading like wildfire through dry grass. "Order," the law speaker called, striking his staff against the stone. "Order in this." "Assembly." Erlend's face had gone pale, then red with fury. "This is madness. You're taking the word of a mute thrall over 3 free men of good standing? She's been coached, manipulated by desperate women who will..." "Then explain the kitchen thrall." Ingrid's voice cut through. "Bjorg, the one who served Halvard his last meal, the one who vanished the same night Orm tried to murder this girl. Where is she, Erlend? Why did she disappear so conveniently? How should I know what thralls do?" Erlend's voice rose, losing its smooth control. "They run away all the time. It proves nothing." But Solveig stepped forward then, her weathered face grave. "I've run that kitchen for 23 years. Never had a thrall run without taking her things. Bjorg left everything behind. Her blanket, her spare dress, her eating bowl. She didn't run. Someone made sure she couldn't talk." "Wild speculation." Kjetil spoke up for the first time, his blacksmith's voice like grinding stones. "You're building fantasy from fragments. The evidence is clear. Thorvald was found with his brother's blood on him. These coincidences and thrall stories change nothing." "Coincidences?" Astrid's voice shook with rage. "My husband and his brother were inseparable. They loved each other. Everyone in this settlement knows that. But Erlend wanted Thorvald's land. Everyone knows that too. He offered to buy it twice. Twice Thorvald refused, because without the creek access, his farm would fail. And now, conveniently, Halvard is dead. Thorvald is condemned, and Erlend inherits everything as the closest male relative. You dare accuse me?" Erlend's hand moved to his sword hilt. "You dare stand before this assembly and call me a murderer based on the gestures of a broken thrall and the paranoid theories of hysterical women?" "I dare because it's the truth," Astrid shot back. "And you know it. You planned this. You poisoned Halvard to make him seem drunk. You killed him and positioned Thorvald to..." "Take the blame. You used Bjorg to deliver the poison and then silenced her. You tried to silence Liv when she got too close. And now you're standing there in your expensive blue wool with a tear that matches the fabric caught 9 feet up on that stable beam, telling us we're imagining things." The assembly had gone completely silent. Everyone stared at Erlend's cloak, at the small tear near his shoulder that he'd tried to hide by adjusting the fabric. The same tear pattern as the cloth Astrid held. Erlend's face twisted. For just a moment his mask cracked. Liv saw it. Raw fury, cornered desperation. The look of a man who'd planned everything perfectly and watched it unravel because of a mute thrall he'd dismissed as nothing. "Enough." The Jarl stood, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Erlend, cousin, show me your cloak. Let us see if this tear matches the cloth found at the scene." "This is an outrage," Erlend said, but his voice had lost conviction. "I'm being accused based on..." "Show me the cloak." The Jarl's tone left no room for argument. For a long moment, Erlend didn't move. The assembly held its breath. Liv's heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Everything balanced on this moment, this single choice. Then Orm moved. Fast as a snake, He drew his blade and grabbed Liv, yanking her against his chest, the knife pressed to her throat. This ends now. We walk out of here or the thrall dies, and then we'll have truth about who's lying and who's innocent. The assembly exploded into chaos. Warriors reached for weapons. Women screamed. Children cried. But Orm backed toward the edge of the gathering, dragging Liv with him, the blade biting into her skin just enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Let her go." Thorvald's voice rang out, broken and desperate. "Please, she's innocent. She was only trying to help. Let her go and I'll accept your judgment. I'll go into exile willingly. Just don't hurt her." But Orm wasn't listening. His eyes were wild now, panicked. Ketil had drawn his own blade, moving to flank him. And Erlend's hand was on his sword, his face transformed into something ugly and desperate. They were going to run, or fight, or kill everyone who stood in their way. Liv's damaged throat burned, her eyes watered. The knife pressed harder against her windpipe. She could feel her pulse beating against the blade, each throb bringing her closer to death. Then a voice cut through the chaos, young and clear and furious. "I saw them too." Everyone froze, turned. A boy stepped forward from the crowd, maybe 13 winters old, skinny and sharp-faced. A thrall from the stables. "I saw them," he repeated, his voice shaking but determined. "That night, I was sleeping in the hayloft. I saw them kill Halvard. Saw them poison him first, then stab him when he fought back. Saw them position Thorvald's unconscious body over the corpse. I was too scared to speak. But she wasn't. So I won't be either." The boy pointed at Erlend, Ketil, and Orm. 3 accusations from a trembling finger. "Liars, murderers, all 3 of you." The blade at Liv's throat trembled. Orm's breathing had gone ragged, his grip on her tightening until she could barely breathe. Around them, warriors had drawn weapons, forming a slowly closing circle. There was no escape. He knew it. They all knew it. "Drop the knife, Orm." The Jarl's voice was cold as winter iron. "Drop it now and you'll face judgment like a man. Keep it there and you'll die like a coward with no honor to your name." For one terrible moment, Liv thought he would do it. Thought he would slash her throat just for spite, just to take someone down with him. She could feel the decision wavering in the tension of his muscles, in the quickening of his breath against her ear. Then the blade fell away. Orm shoved her forward so hard she stumbled, falling to her knees in the dirt. Astrid rushed to her side, pulling her up, checking the shallow cut on her throat with. Shaking hands, warriors surrounded Erlend, Ketil, and Orm, weapons drawn. The 3 men stood back to back, but they didn't fight. What was the point? The truth had unraveled everything. The boy's testimony, Liv's gestures, the physical evidence, all of it had painted a picture too clear to deny. "You would believe thralls over free men?" Erlend's voice had gone hollow, all the smoothness stripped away. "You would condemn your own cousin based on the word of property?" "I believe the truth," the Jarl said, his face carved from stone. "And the truth is written in your actions, in your panic, in the blade you drew when cornered. Innocent men don't threaten to kill witnesses. Innocent men don't flee judgment." The law speaker struck his staff against the stone 3 times. The sound echoed across the silent assembly like thunder. "The evidence is clear. Erlend Magnusson, Ketil Ironhand, and Orm Ketilsson are guilty of the murder of Halvard Thorvaldsson. They are guilty of false testimony. They are guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. They are guilty of attempting to murder witnesses to silence the truth." "No." Erlend's voice cracked. "No, this isn't how it was supposed to. The punishment for murder is death or permanent exile," the law speaker continued, his ancient voice carrying the weight of generations. "The punishment for false testimony that condemned an innocent man is death or permanent exile. The Jarl will decide which." The Jarl stood silent for a long moment, staring at his cousin. Liv could see the conflict in his face. This was family, blood, but it was also justice, truth, the foundations that held their entire society together. "Permanent exile," the Jarl finally said, each word falling like a stone. You will be declared outlaw. Any man may kill you without consequence. You may take nothing but the clothes on your back. You have until sunset to be gone from this settlement and all lands I control. If you return, you will be executed on sight. Erland's face crumpled. Exile was death, just slower, colder, more certain. He would freeze in the wilderness or starve or be killed by the first warrior who wanted glory for ending an outlaw's life. There was no coming back from this, no redemption, no second chance. As for Thorvald Sigurdsson, the law speaker turned to where Thorvald still knelt, tears streaming down his face. The charges against you are dismissed. Your honor is restored. Your lands remain yours, and you have the right to claim blood price from Erland's remaining property for the murder of your brother. Warriors cut Thorvald's bonds. He collapsed forward, hands pressed to the earth, his entire body shaking with sobs. Astrid ran to him, throwing herself down beside him, their arms wrapping around each other like drowning people clutching at life itself. The assembly erupted in noise, some cheering the justice done, some arguing about the precedent of believing thralls, some simply relieved that truth had won out over conspiracy. But through it all, Liv stood silent, her hand pressed to her bleeding throat, watching as 3 men were led away to face exile and death. She'd done it. She'd spoken her truth without words. She'd saved an innocent man's life. But the weight of it sat heavy in her chest. 3 men would die because of her testimony. Maybe they deserved it. Maybe justice required it. But she would carry their deaths with her forever, whether they were righteous or not. You saved my husband's life. Astrid appeared before her, eyes red but fierce with gratitude. You risked everything when you had nothing. You spoke when everyone said you had no voice. How can I ever repay that? Liv shook her head. She didn't want payment, didn't want anything except to return to the shadows where she was safe, where no one noticed her, where the weight of life and death decisions didn't rest on her silent shoulders. But Ingrid stepped forward then, the Jarl's wife, power and authority, radiating from her like heat from a forge. The settlement owes you a debt. You are no longer thrall. I grant you freedom. You will work in my household as a free woman, with wages and respect. You will never be property again. The words hit Liv like physical blows. Freedom. The thing she'd never dared to dream about. The thing that seemed impossible as flying or breathing underwater. And yet here it was, offered freely, earned through courage she hadn't known she possessed. Tears burned in her eyes. Her throat ached with emotion too big to contain in her damaged voice. She dropped to her knees, not in submission, but in overwhelming gratitude. Her hands pressed over her face as silent sobs shook her entire body. And the boy, the Jarl's voice rang out. The stable thrall who spoke truth when it mattered. He too is granted freedom. Let it be known that in this settlement truth is valued over status. Voice matters more than rank, and courage is recognized wherever it appears. The boy, whose name Liv didn't even know, stood frozen in shock. Then slowly, a smile spread across his thin face, wide and disbelieving and full of sudden blazing hope. The assembly gradually dispersed. Warriors escorted Erland, Kjetil, and Orm to gather their meager belongings before exile. Thorvald and Astrid clung to each other, whispering words meant only for themselves. The Jarl and Ingrid returned to the Great Hall, already discussing the redistribution of Erland's forfeited property, and Liv sat. In the dirt, a free woman now, her hand still pressed to the shallow cut on her throat. The cut that had almost been her death, the throat that had been silent for 12 years, but had finally found a way to speak the truth that mattered most. Solveig appeared beside her, settling down with a grunt. The old cook said nothing for a long moment, just sat there in companionable silence. Then she reached over and took Liv's hand, squeezed it once, firm and warm. You did good, girl. Real good. Your mother would have been proud. Liv had no memory of her mother beyond vague impressions of warmth and hunger, but the words settled something inside her chest. Some ache she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. She looked around the Thing grounds, saw the law speaker's stone where justice had been done, saw the empty space where 3 guilty men had stood, saw Thorvald and Astrid beginning to rebuild their shattered lives, saw the stable boy talking excitedly with other freed thralls. His entire future transformed. She'd been invisible her whole life, property, less than human to most people. But in the end, it was her silence that had given her the greatest power. Her invisibility that had let her see what others missed. Her voicelessness that had somehow spoken louder than any words. The settlement would remember this day. Would remember that justice came from an unexpected source. That truth could be told without words. That the least valued member of their society had saved them from allowing murder to stand unchallenged. Liv rose slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. She was free now. Free to choose her path. Free to build a life beyond scrubbing pots and gutting fish. Free to be seen as human rather than property. It terrified her. It exhilarated her. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at water far below, knowing the only way forward was to jump. But she'd already jumped once, when she'd decided to investigate a murder that wasn't her concern. When she'd approached Astrid despite every instinct screaming to stay invisible. When she'd stood before the entire assembly and told her truth through gestures and determination. She'd already jumped, and she'd survived the fall. Whatever came next, she would face it the same way. With courage she didn't know she had. With a voice that spoke in silence. With the knowledge that even the smallest, most dismissed person could change everything when they refused to stay quiet. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning frost. A new day, a new life, a new beginning built on truth spoken without words. And for the first time in 12 years of silence, Liv smiled. Liv's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. How many voices around us go unheard simply because we've decided they don't matter? She was invisible not because she couldn't communicate, but because no one bothered to listen. She had no power not because she lacked courage, but because society had stripped her of value before she ever had a chance to prove it. And yet, when it mattered most, when an innocent life hung in the balance, this dismissed slave girl became the most important person in her entire world. It makes you wonder, what would you have done in her place? Would you have risked everything for someone who'd never noticed your existence? Would you have spoken up knowing it could cost you your life? Or would you have stayed invisible, stayed safe, and let injustice win because fighting it seemed impossible? The truth is, we all have a voice. Some of us speak with words, others with actions, still others with the quiet courage of refusing to look away when everyone else does. Liv teaches us that your value isn't determined by your status, your wealth, or even your ability to speak. It's determined by your willingness to stand for truth when standing costs you everything. She was a slave who became a hero not by gaining power, but by using the power she'd always had. The power to see, to remember, and to refuse to let evil hide in plain sight. Her silence became her strength. Her invisibility became her weapon. And her courage became the voice that saved a life and changed a community forever. If this story moved you, if Liv's courage inspired you, if you believe that even the smallest voice deserves to be heard, then share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video to help others find it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that remind us what humans are capable of when they refuse to give up. Because somewhere out there, someone feels invisible, voiceless, and powerless. And maybe, just maybe, Liv's story will help them find the courage to speak their truth, however they can. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, you are never as powerless as the world tries to convince you that you are.